What is up, guys? It's Sosa MMA here, back with another video, and it's been impossible to avoid, so I'm sure at this point you guys have seen a fair amount of coverage regarding the John Jones assault allegations that went on earlier this week. Kind of at the end of March was when the actual incident itself took place, but the report wasn't filed until this week, so that's when it's all been coming to light and everything like that. But there's been so many statements, so much contradiction, lots of fake news and poor reporting, mostly from NBC. So I just kind of wanted to have one video where I sum up everything for you guys, go over what every party has said regarding the allegations, kind of break down any inconsistencies, and then talk about any factors that could be skewing any of the statements that we've gotten. So it's kind of a foreview for this video. It is going to be put together a little differently than most of my other videos have been. So let me know what you guys think about the presentation for this video down below. And we're going to get started with some obviously false stuff. Also, before I get too deep into discussing the false stuff, make sure and like the video if you liked. You probably don't know if you like it yet, so you don't have to do it right now, and I'll remind you later. But just keep it in mind that if you like this video, you should like it. Really helpful in the algorithm. But the first major thing here is that Jones currently is not, and at has no point during this process been arrested. And it's pretty confusing because Jones gets arrested a lot. So it is easy to think that he's arrested when he isn't. But right now, he is not arrested and has not been for any of these crimes. He has been issued a court summons, but he is not arrested for these crimes. So any outlet reporting that is incorrect. He is free right now. He's in Texas with his daughters for a volleyball tournament, which he tweeted about. I don't have the tweet in the PowerPoint because there's not much point in bringing that into it, really, but just to know that. And then there was also the NBC article that I talked about in the foreview. And in that, it was mentioned that Jones said that the agents came to his house at 4 a.m., or maybe the agent said that. That was completely misreported. It's not 4 a.m., it was 4 p.m., which Jones's camera footage shows, not only in the timestamp on the cameras, but also by the fact that it's broad daylight. That's just something to know, just so that you don't have that floating around in your head, because it was confusing me. And it can definitely be confusing when you have that, because it's more understandable to be really frustrated if someone's coming to your house at 4 a.m. More understandable for there to be a party going on that Jones is sleeping in the middle of as well. But that is not the case. It was 4 p.m. So all of that will make sense when we kind of get deeper in and talk about some of the details here. Just wanted to get those right off the bat, though, immediately, so you know neither of those things are true at all. So guys, I thought it would be best to kind of break this video down into three sort of distinct parts. The first part, we're just going to go over all of the police reports or anything that's commenting on what Crystal Martinez, who is the only drug testing agent who has made a statement regarding the incident, has said on the matter. And then in the second part, we'll go over what John Jones has said. But by doing this, we'll be able to really clearly build the narrative that Crystal Martinez is portraying, then really clearly build the narrative that John Jones is portraying, then see where the contrasts are in between them, so we can see where we have to try and figure out what the discrepancies are, who's telling the truth, and who's lying about that. So the initial police report alleged that UFC heavyweight champion John Jones assaulted and threatened to kill a drug testing agent during a recent visit to his home. Then, according to the police report, Martinez told authorities that she and a coworker arrived at John Jones's home approximately 4 p.m. to retrieve a urine sample. Martinez reported that Jones was cooperative at first after she laid down her equipment and presented her identification, which included her personal cell phone. That'll be important later. Martinez claimed that Jones and her coworker went around the corner so he could give them a urine sample. This is going to be slightly different in another report. I don't think that discrepancy is that major, though. And then when they returned, Martinez said that her coworker appeared nervous. In another report, she said that he was very pale, and said that Jones was not able to urinate. Martinez at that point recommended a blood sample instead, and that's when she said Jones became agitated that he was tense and puffed up. And she doesn't say it, or at least it's not mentioned in this report, but she does also note that he appeared intoxicated, that there was fumes of alcohol on him as well. Then she told police that Jones began asking if they had money because he was going to sue them. And he also brought up violating HIPAA here, which I'll talk about as well in a little bit, and why he's saying that, because it's also not super clear in every report. They don't really break down or explain what's being said there. And we don't get a ton of clarity overall to the resolution of that either. But I'll finish up and explain that by the end. And it's at this point that she says that Jones picks up her phone and starts recording them. And in this video, which police did say that they have seen when they met with Crystal Martinez at a separate location after the incident, and in the video before it gets cut off, when Jones allegedly puts the phone in his pocket, you can hear Jones say something along the lines of, "Here's fucking Jerome and his girlfriend in my garage." And it's at that point that, again, the video cuts off, and Martinez alleges that Jones then gets into her face and says, "Why do you people fucking come so early? Do you know what happens to people who come to my house? They end up dead." In some versions of this quote, Martinez says, "Do you know what happens to people who come to my house this early? They end up dead." But in this version, that's not what is said. And you'll want to remember that quote, because we'll talk about it later when we talk about the time frame of everything, because 4 p.m. being early is really interesting, and we'll talk about the factors of what might have led John Jones to say that, in the condition that he was in and stuff like that. But that's kind of the full duration of the initial report that came out. Now, I did want to include this excerpt from the Daily Mail as well, and the reason I wanted to toss this into the video is actually mainly one line of it here. The line where it says, "After allegedly pocketing the agent's phone, Jones is accused of refusing to hand the device back." And the rest of it isn't so important. It largely touches on stuff that we've already discussed. There's some details that weren't covered in the first one, but I threw them in anyways, so we don't have to cover them here. The reason I want to touch on that is because there will be a discrepancy we'll talk about later in what Jones describes as the capacity he was holding the phone in, and this line right here, which isn't covered in any of the other reports that I've seen. There does seem to be some details that are in some reports and not in other reports, which could either, one, question the authenticity of the reporting, not necessarily saying that the reporters didn't do a good job, but just that if the sources are hard to fully get all the information from, that they might be missing small details like this. Like, for example, this indicating Martinez did indicate to Jones that that was her phone and that she would like it back, to which he refused, which is not directly stated, but implied by the language for sure. You wouldn't say Jones is accused of refusing to hand the device back if it was never requested for him to do that. If he merely grabbed the phone in mistake, began recording with it, then put it in his pocket, and nobody ever requested for him to give it back, then you wouldn't say that he was accused of refusing to hand the phone back. That doesn't make any sense. So that will be important when we discuss that discrepancy. And it seems silly to spend so much time over, but I think the phone is one of the bigger things that'll tell us who's being honest and who's lying in this situation. Okay. Now, before we finish up the discussion of the police reports with going over all the information that was revealed in the most recent up-to-date police report, I just want to briefly break to kind of discuss all of the time frame questions that we might have here by this point. Because one of them will be answered by this final report, but it's the only one that we don't really have any solid answers to. And right off the bat, let's not talk about 4 a.m. because obviously that was just NBC doing terrible reporting. So congrats to NBC for like butchering almost every detail that they reported about this story somehow. Very impressive. I want to talk about this birthday party element, right? Because in that initial statement, Joan. Well, actually, we haven't read Joan's initial statement, but it is noted that he was napping during this test. And I think that we'll read in the next police report that when the agents got there, they actually didn't speak to Jones at the door. They spoke to a male who's not identified in the report, who then led them to Jones, who was in the garage. And it's not noted if either the agents observed him sleeping or being woken up or anything like that. But it's just really odd to me. It's not necessarily odd to be napping at 4 p.m., right? That's a fine time to nap. And I'm a nap enjoyer myself, too. So I'm not going to, like, throw shade at a homie for napping, right? That's not what I'm here to do. But it's really odd to, on one hand, claim and be so self-defensive, and we'll talk about that later, about celebrating this party and everything like that, but then also be dead asleep in the middle of it. So Jones has got to be on like some sort of bender or something right now, man. Like homie's not doing well, obviously, if he's just napping in the middle of a house party banger, man. Like, you know, if I imagine John Jones, I got to think that he's a guy who at least used to be the life of the party. So this is definitely pretty disappointing to hear that he's just conked out in the fucking garage, bro, during a party. Like, come on, bro. That's ridiculous. But it is really interesting. I don't know what that serves to indicate, if there's any dishonesty from Jones. I don't think he's being dishonest about the party. That seems accurate to me based on what he described, unless it wasn't a birthday party and it was more of a nose candy party. But I don't know. But yeah, just interesting to note for sure on that. Because it seems like there's kind of a discrepancy there. And it really factors in too, when you hear Jones say, do you know what happens when you send people this early? They end up dead. Or we'll look at Jones's version of the statement as well. But even in his, he's saying not to send people early when he's giving his less threatening version of the statement. So it's really interesting to know that. And I think that we will talk about the factors, and certainly him having woken up from a nap recently, allegedly. We all know how that post-nap grogginess hit you. It can feel like it's a whole new day. So maybe that was going on. Could also be him being drunk and hungover, as it was noted that he did smell of alcohol. But that's all important to note and consider when thinking about his frame of mind at the time that this stuff was going on, because it's a really strange thing to say based on the time of day that those agents were there. It's a totally reasonable time to be going to somebody's house for something like that. So it seemed very strange to me for sure. But the last thing here, too, is why, if the incident happened on March 30th, it took so long for a police report to pop up. But the reason is actually going to be covered, like I said, in this next slide. But Martinez was actually told not to report to police. Now, this report is the one that opens up a bunch of questions. And I don't think that it calls into doubt the legitimacy of any of these claims. It just kind of calls into doubt the power structure of having the UFC be so closely related, and also in a much different power dynamic with this drug testing agency than they were in with USADA. So what do I mean by that? In this report published in MMA Fighting, Martinez claimed that she instructed her boss that she wanted to file a police report after having already filed an internal report. But her supervisor, who I think his name is Pierre Laughlin, his last name's Laughlin for sure. That's who they're referring to whenever they mention him by name there in the rest of the article. But she was instructed to hold off until she was spoken to by UFC representatives regarding the matter. And then she also said that her coworker, who John Jones referred to as Jerome, didn't want to file a report because he was, quote, afraid of the repercussions, which really makes you wonder, is he talking about Jones? There was a period of time in the report where Jones and Jerome were alone together. And as we'll discuss when we get into Jones's side, there is also some evidence to suggest that Jones and this agent have some sort of history with each other, unless Jones was misinterpreting the current situation. But regardless, there's either that element, or it's her coworker being concerned that there's going to be repercussions from up top from the company or from the UFC in coming forward with these allegations. And either way, you really don't like the sound of it, because it either means that Jones was threatening to some way where this guy thinks that if he goes forward, he's going to have to pay a physical price for it, or he thinks he's going to have to pay a social or financial price for it in the form of, corporate punishment for speaking out about this, which is pretty terrifying to hear. And then Martinez went on to tell police that she wanted to pursue criminal charges. And then the officers noted, after following up on that report, that they tried to reach out to the coworker and the boss, but didn't receive answers for either of them. So they left voicemails. But Laughlin, the boss, did eventually reach back out to them. And he said that all he knew is what Crystal told him, and he didn't want to give a statement on it, which just really goes to show again how scared he is of losing this UFC gig, it seems. But it really paints a pretty ugly picture of what's going on behind the scenes when you've got an allegation this serious trying to be pushed to the side just to preserve a big star. It's pretty disgusting. All right. So by this point, we've covered everything that's been said in police statements or by any of the victims of the alleged incident. Now we're going to cover what John Jones says, starting with his first post on Instagram. And in this post, it read, quote, "I want to address reports about me allegedly threatening a drug tester's life and taking a phone. I want to clarify that there's a video showing both drug testers leaving my home after the testing session where we exchanged a high five and a hug." Before I go on and read the rest of the quote, I really want to note something here. It's not like a smoking barrel or anything, but if you are clear of a crime and somebody accuses you of committing a crime, typically a innocent individual is going to be laser focused on the crime in particular, because it's something that they know they had nothing to do with, and it's something that, because they've been accused of it while having nothing to do with, that is going to stick out like a sore thumb to them, because they want nothing to do with that. They don't want that association with them. Whereas if you have someone who's guilty, they may be more likely to beat around the bush or focus on unnecessary details, because it's actually way more comfortable to talk about than that. So when you say there's a video showing both of them leaving my house where we exchanged a high five and a hug, an innocent person could say that, because that could suggest like, hey, if we're all buddy buddy as they're leaving my house, how was I threatening to murder them minutes before? That doesn't make any sense. And that's fair enough. We'll talk about that angle as well. But I would definitely, personally, instead of that, be saying, I want to clarify, I never fucking did that shit. That's what I would be saying, because I don't want anybody thinking I did that shit. And then I would say, hey, I just want to address these reports. I want to clarify I didn't do any of that shit. In fact, here's this video of us all being buddy buddy afterwards. If I was so fucking rude to them, why would they be all buddy buddy with me afterwards, right? But it does suggest to me there a little bit implicitly that he doesn't want to talk about what happened in the garage or any of the aggressive conversations. And it's much easier for him to discuss something that is amicable on video, as opposed to discussing the conversation in the garage, which, even if he ends up being more correct than the people reporting, clearly had some level of aggression to it that he does not want portrayed at all. But moving on, he says, although I was frustrated with the unprofessionalism, used profanity out of frustration. It ended friendly and amicably, nothing threatening at all. I was actually celebrating a friend's birthday party at my home, and I believe it's perfectly normal to celebrate in the comfort of my own home. Like I said earlier, the report with him saying that he was napping versus him celebrating a friend's birthday party, kind of weird. Really vibe killer if you got John Jones at your birthday party and then he decides to go nap in the fucking garage in the middle of it, bro. I'm sorry. If you're John Jones and I invite you to my birthday party and you pull some shit like that, you ain't getting invited to the next birthday party. That's all I'm going to say on that matter. But furthermore, on that, saying it's perfectly normal to celebrate in the comfort of his own home is so fucking weird, guys. So weird. It's so defensive. And I will have to go back and check the court documents. I thought I did a pretty thorough review, but I haven't seen any police documents or court summons that have charged Jones, or any reports from Crystal Martinez that talked about her being offended that there was a birthday party going on in the home, or that Jones is being charged with throwing a birthday party at his home. I'm not aware of any laws on the books in Albuquerque, New Mexico that prevent birthday parties in his home. And I think he knows that we don't give a fuck that he was celebrating a birthday party in his home. But it's again another thing of like, if you were saying that you never did this, right? You would be adamant and focused. You would be like, hey, when we discussed things out in the garage, I may have been rude, or I may have been impolite with the agents, but I was never threatening, and I never put my hands on anybody or took possession of anybody's personal belongings. But instead, he wants to defend himself for throwing a lame ass house party that he's in the fucking garage in the middle of, because that shit's sleeper, dog. We don't care that you throw shitty parties, John. Nobody's putting you on trial for that. We're putting you on trial publicly right now because you've been accused of taking a woman's phone and threatening to kill her. That's the problem, not the house party. Like I said, I think he knows that, and it feels like a deflection to me. And then, if you want to get into more deflection, the end of the quote, I must say this particular tester behaved quite unprofessionally and even breached standard protocol along with HIPAA laws. Throughout my 20 years of being subjected to drug tests, I have never encountered such an incident with a DCOL officer before. And we'll talk about this HIPAA laws angle in a second. We'll do it when we get to the lingering questions at the end and talk about factors. But again, focusing on what the agents were doing instead of himself and talking about what he might have said or anything like that, he's quite defensive about this incident for sure. And I also want to say right now that while my commentary here clearly has a lean against Jones's honesty, and there are some factors that go into that. He's had a history of terrible, terrible drug test results, whether it be the picograms, whether it be his horrible testosterone results and the eventual drug test failures against Daniel Cormier, whether you want to take the one that ended up getting him suspended and that Daniel Cormier fight completely canceled on UFC 200, or you want to take the second fight where they made it to the fight, but he ended up getting the result overturned after knocking out Daniel Cormier because of another failed drug test. He's had run-in after run-in after run-in, and he has a history of being dishonest, right? But Jones could totally be telling the truth, and charging Jones in the court of public opinion or not, doesn't matter that our words don't hold any weight, is not the right thing to do, because if we just jump down his throat off of the initial report, we are just taking one person's word over another. It's hearsay by this point until we've had any sort of trial, had any sort of investigation, gotten any witnesses interrogated or investigated. We need a subpoena on Jerome's ass and on that Laughlin dude to see what those motherfuckers are hiding. But we can't just say that Jones is 100% telling the truth and this Martinez bitch is lying. And we can't say the opposite either, that Martinez is 100% in the right and that Jones is a terrible piece of shit. And we're doing a terrible disservice either way. So I just want to say that before I go any further here. But John Jones also posted a video to his Instagram account, so we'll look at that real quick. Now, what you guys just saw was a video that could appear to be somewhat damning for the side of Crystal Martinez and those alleging that John Jones did commit this assault and did threaten these agents' lives, because you see John Jones walking out with Jerome, who or at least the guy I assumed to be Jerome, and Crystal Martinez. What's really odd is it appears there's some sort of dump truck following her down the driveway. But regardless, as they're leaving the home, you see Crystal Martinez reach out, hold her hand out there for a second till John Jones high fives her, and then Jones kind of wraps his arm around Jerome's back for a sort of half hug sort of thing as they walk down to the end of the driveway. Jones closes the door on his van, walks up to the house, and the video clip ends. That is around 4 o'clock on Saturday. And it appears that are very friendly, just as Jones said in the Instagram post. But we'll talk about why that could be misleading in a little bit. But I don't think that it necessarily is. I do think that that video is really interesting because it does seem like there is a really calm energy to it. But like I said, I think that there's explanations for that could not be damning as well. So we'll kind of think about the video more later. But for now, we just want to get into the report that was released more recently when police spoke with Jones to get an updated statement from him regarding the matter. So the Jones had to say that he was bothered by the sample collector's presence because he was hungover at the time. So kind of lame, honestly, to be hungover in the middle of a party. You got to make sure you're hitting the Bloody Mary in the morning to kind of clear that up so that you can still be a dog when the party starts going. And clearly he was not. So really sad to see 36-year-old Jones start to lose his partying ways, but he does say that he used profanity during the process, but he didn't harm, kill, or make threats rather of harming or killing anybody. And then he also said that she was a liar throughout her report. He also said that he never threatened to sue either of the employees. But he did, rather, he didn't say he was going to sue Crystal. He did say that he was going to sue the other guy who I've been referring to as Jerome, because that's what Jones called him. And the reason he said it was for bringing his girlfriend to his home, which Jones considered a HIPAA violation. Now, what I have not seen covered in this report, in any other reports, and good luck finding it, is whether Jones is referring to this incident or if he's referring to another incident altogether. Because what it seems to me is that in this incident, at least, I wouldn't assume that Jerome and Crystal have any sort of relationship with one another from the evidence that I've gathered, just insofar as that Crystal wants to go forward and Jerome does not with the information. That would suggest to me that they're not on the same page, which obviously could be possible if they were in a relationship, but it would seem more likely to me that they would be coming out together with something like that if it was the case. Which then begs the question of which of the two possibilities it is. I guess that's number one possibility, is that I'm wrong and that they are dating. Number two possibility is that John Jones misconstrued the presence of Crystal Martinez, another agent, as being Jerome's girlfriend, which is kind of sexist, bro. But the third possibility is that Jerome has had previous contact with Jones, and at that point in time did bring his girlfriend. So then we really have an interesting question with Jerome and Jones being alone at that point, and Jerome being so pale, not wanting to come forward and talk to the police. Because if there's an angle there or something going on, that could be kind of interesting. I don't think that it eclipses anything else that happened, even if it is true, assuming that any of the other stuff that we talked about is as well, because everything else has been so much more important. But it's certainly an interesting angle to note here, and not cool for Jerome to be bringing his GF on the work calls, bro. I get wanting to be able to introduce her to John Jones, so that's pretty sick. As long as he doesn't threaten to kill her, that'd be not so sick. That happened. Then he also said, kind of in response to the him getting up in her face when he made the threatening line comment, that he didn't get closer than when he gave the high five to her. And then also, this is really important, when they were inside the home, he said that he accidentally picked up her phone because he thought that it was his own, and then he placed it back on the counter shortly thereafter, which again, as I noted, if we are to believe that one excerpt from the Daily Mail article is not true, because he would have known that he was in possession of her phone by the point in time that he made the threatening remark and was still possessing it. I will briefly talk about it here, but we'll talk about it more in length when we talk about the questions that are still outstanding here. But I do consider it a point towards Jones is either trustworthiness or how impaired his thought processes were at the time. It's one or the other, that he made the video on her phone that we talked about earlier of him saying, "Here's Jerome and his fucking girlfriend in my garage." And the reason I say that is because it makes a lot more sense that he would think it was his phone, pick it up, and start a recording on his phone so that he could show Jerome showing up with a girl to his house, especially if it happened before, than it does for him to do that on her phone. Because even if he's in an impaired mind state, that could make it make sense for him to do something that stupid. But I would still think he would have been trying to grab his phone to make that recording, because I wouldn't think that he would want someone else to have video of him threatening these people or being aggressive towards them when he later threatened them in any event. Doesn't really make a ton of sense. Whereas him recording Jerome to get evidence for something he's alleging Jerome has done makes a lot more sense to me. So that's kind of something to consider too. But here's where Jones covers the threatening statement, first time that he really talks about it at all. And he says that towards the end of the session, he was asked if there was any statements that he would like to give to DFSI, the new drug testing agency. He said, quote, "Tell everyone at headquarters not to send people to my home so early because it could be a dangerous environment." And he said he clarified, it's not clear in this report or anywhere else if he clarified this to them or clarified it to the police, but he was saying that multiple people or parties could be present at the home. But also, that doesn't really say why it's not safe to be there either, to be honest with you. Because if your parties are so unsafe that a cop or a drug testing agent, rather, not a cop, pulling up could just make it a completely unsafe environment, you got some fucked up yayo parties going on at your house, my boy, because that is not good. And you means you got some shifty individuals who are hanging out there for sure. Because 4 p.m. also isn't that early either. So it really seems to me like he realizes how threatening that statement comes off, wanted to have some sort of cope line for it, but it doesn't come across as very convincing to me. So at the end of the day, we're left with some questions. I think one of the biggest ones is Jerome and his girlfriend, because the more and more I think about it, the more that one lingers with me on whether or not Jones is just construing it. The fact that Crystal Martinez never makes any allusion to the comment and what she thought about it. Nobody ever asks her about it, or if they do, it's never mentioned in any of these reports. We aren't sure from Jones's perspective if he has a prior relationship with this individual or if this was his first time interacting with him. It does kind of sound like from the first Instagram comment that's the first time and he's construing Crystal as his girlfriend. But then in that instance, why isn't Crystal coming out and just saying, "Hey, we are not dating"? I don't know what he was talking about there. Really interesting. I don't know what role that has to play in any of this, or if there was some previous visit and he had a girl then, and Jones is just commenting on it now because he has a new woman here. And he's both were drug testing agents. Maybe one of them was drug testing agent Crystal, and the previous one was a girlfriend. No idea, but it is interesting. I would like to hear more comments from Jones and some clarifying information from Crystal Martinez regarding that. I'd also love to hear more from Jerome, specifically about what happened when him and Jones were alone that made it to where Crystal noted how nervous and pale he seemed after returning from trying to collect the urine samples. What's up with the phone, too? Who's telling the truth on that? Did Jones genuinely mean to take her phone, possess it, and make it to where she couldn't call for help or anything like that? Did he accidentally take the phone, and then when she asked to give it back, refused to because he was angry, and then ultimately changed his mind on that and try and cover it up? Did he genuinely grab it but not think that it was hers and thought it was his and take that video on it because of that. I have no idea. I'm almost kind of leaning to the last one because nothing else makes a ton of sense to me. But we don't have the full story here, I don't think. I don't know if we've got anybody who's being fully honest, and I'll talk about why that is by the end. And I also want to know whether Jones actually issued the worst version of that threat or not, because I think it's possible that Crystal Martinez could be fully telling the truth, and we still not know whether or not Jones is more accurate or her. And I'll break that down when I talk about the factors. All right, last but not least, we're going to talk about some factors and try and put a big old ribbon on it, say kind of where I think everything stands at right now. So, all of the confusing things from Jones, all of the aggressive lines from Jones could be explained by him being drunk and just having woken up from a nap. So him saying it's early could be him being confused because it's a nap or because he's hungover. All of those things, 100%. So that's something that you have to consider when you're analyzing this because so much of it's confusing, and that layer of alcohol does add to that. And then the big thing, and why it might sound kind of confusing that I could say that Crystal isn't lying, but Jones is more accurate with the statement he delivered, is because him being angry in any way or standoffish could immediately, especially if you're a woman and you're looking at huge ass John Jones, make you very intimidated right off the bat. And you could interpret other things during the rest of the interaction poorly or wrong because you're nervous or you're scared. So that's totally possible too and can factor into this. And lastly, when you're considering the video, let's say that Crystal's version of events is entirely correct, which I'm not saying. I don't know. But let's say for a moment that she's being 100% honest in everything she said, then it's still totally plausible that after some amount of de-escalation, them finishing the tests, because Crystal did mention she didn't want to cease the tests because there's fines associated with refusing or not submitting to a UFC drug test, so she didn't want to make Jones angry, that in order to keep the interaction as friendly, as unintimidating as possible, and as safe as possible, Crystal and Jerome were both amicable with Jones to the best of their ability for the rest of the interaction. Totally reasonable for that to happen too. So at the end of the day, I believe the truth lies somewhere in the middle here. I think that Jones is being dishonest. I think that Jones is being dishonest about what he said. I think Jones is being dishonest about knowing whether or not it was her phone. I think he may have accidentally picked it up at first, but I think he held on to it after knowing that because he was angry. I think Jones may have issued more threats to Jerome in private as well, if it was the case that anything had happened unprofessional from Jerome in the past that Jones might have dirt on. It's possible he could have been blackmailed as well too. But I also think that some of the statements given by Crystal Martinez could be skewed by her nervousness as well. And I don't think that everything that she said is going to be fully accurate. But until we ultimately get some sort of analysis from somebody else who was there who can shed some light on what happened, really want to hear from Jerome on this, we won't really get the full story, unfortunately. So I really want to know what you guys have to think about this. I put a lot of work into this video, so if you did end up liking it, please do drop a like down below, sub for more, comment your thoughts down below. Let's hope that John Jones didn't do any crazy fuck shit and will be able to return to the octagon sometime before 2025. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great night. Peace out.